girl Bree back with another video. In today's video, I'm actually going to be having a conversation um, regarding finances and budgeting and just kind of becoming more financially responsible. I know for me, this is definitely something that I was interested in just because, like I said, I'm very interested in becoming more financially responsible. The purpose of this conversation is basically learning about zero budgeting and how to zero budget the right way and just become more financially responsible. This is something that I was really interested in because at this point in my life, I am very honed in on becoming more financially responsible and establishing the best credit that I possibly can and just becoming all around debt free. I especially wanted to share this with everybody just because I felt like this was really helpful, and I think that everybody can definitely learn from this. So definitely feel free to grab a notebook, take some notes. I hope that this is something that everybody can take something away from and just have an easier time reaching your goals. So I'm not gonna hold y'all up any further. So yeah, let's just get into it.
Let's just establish this. I am not a certified or a licensed financial advisor. All of the discussions that follow are simply for educational purposes only.
So I guess we could start by you introducing yourself and basically sharing like how you got into basically sharing with people how to budget your money. Like, how did you get started into this yourself? And yeah, we can start there.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to share and give knowledge. I'm humbled by this opportunity, so here we go. Um, my name is Brother Ira, and I would say that I was introduced to finances overall at a very young age, all due to my father. My father was very um, fiscally responsible from what I observed. At a very young age, he would give me books to read and study with regards to just basic budgeting. There were many nights where he would sit me down and he would take out a sheet of paper and a notepad rather, and he would just show me the basics of basic budgeting, so to speak. Now, granted, he wouldn't get into the details of the personal numbers as far as what he was doing to manage and maintain our household as we were coming up, my brothers and sisters and I. But again, what he would do was he would sit down and he would basically show me the format. And so I would say that, along with a combination of the many financial books that my father gave me, even as I left the house to go into the military, a lot of that literature serves as the foundation and the motivation for me to this very day as to why I'm so motivated and very much into finances. Um, Not necessarily so much into the acquisition of money, but just the topic of finances. I'm very intrigued by that, and I feel that the more knowledge that we have as a people, the more we would, of course, benefit from that. So it's kind of how I got started in a nutshell.
That's awesome. That actually made me think of so many other follow-up questions that I wanted to ask you, but I want to keep it all in order as much as possible. So I guess first things first, like in your opinion, I don't know if you want to share like the dictionary definition of it or if you want to just share like your personal insight, but what would you define or how would you define zero budgeting?
I love it. So essentially, zero budgeting is a method that an individual can use to basically know where each individual dollar that they're responsible for, they know where each individual dollar is going, what it's being allotted to. And so the purpose and the power of that all boils down to intentionality. And so intentionality is very important, not only just in finances, but in everything that we do in life. But to focus more on the financial aspect of it, when you write down, for example, all of your bills and all of your expenses for a given time period, let's just say for a month, when you write down all of those numbers and you have a certain amount of income that you have to allocate to each one of those bills, you are already purposed and intentioned that money to be dispersed in that way that you detailed in that budget. So the power of that is when you stick to that budget, when you stick to those assignments that you've already given your money, that subconsciously gives you order in your mind. It gives you peace of the mind also, too, to know that you've already put forth the mental effort, again, to allocate each and every one of your dollars that's coming through your hands to take care of yourself, your responsibilities, and your bills. And also, too, one of the purposes of a zero-based budget, you can also use it to reach your financial goals. So altogether, and ultimately rather, the zero-based budget is like a huge snapshot of where you stand financially, and what your plan is, so to say, for the money that you're responsible for. So without this snapshot, without these allocations of what you're actually going to do with your money, if you're not doing that, then you're just, life is happening to you as opposed to you making life happen. So that's the power of the zero-based budget. And so ultimately what a zero-based budget is, you start from the very top of how much money you have coming in from your income source, whether it's your job, 2 jobs, whatever method you have that allow you to bring in money. You estimate how much that is before you get the money, before you receive the money. And then once you have that money, you put that number at the top of a list, and then you detail below that number each of your expenses, whether it's your rent, your car payment, food, cell phone. And by the time you get done subtracting each and every one of your expenses, the number should equal to 0. So again, the power of the zero-based budget is, let's assume that once you've paid all of your, not paid, let's assume that once you allocated funds for each one of your bills, rent all the way down to cell phone, all the way down to groceries, to daycare and everything, and you come to realize that you have, for example, $500 left. What you can do is you can allocate that extra $500, for example, towards your saving goals. And so once you do that, and once you lock that in mentally, you go throughout the month knowing that, okay, if I want to be able to reach my goals, my goal, for example, of being able to save $500 for this month, I need to strictly adhere to the budget that I've already set.
Mm-hmm.
I need to strictly adhere to my zero-based budget. So in a nutshell, that's the importance and how a zero-based budget would work.
Okay. That definitely just knocked off one of my other questions. You just answered like 2 or 3 of them in that one answer. That was awesome. That was really good information. So with that, how would you compare that to, or how would you compare zero budgeting to traditional budgeting?
Traditional budgeting, and I actually have to recall that process because it's been so many years since I'm so used to doing a zero-based budget. Oh, you just actually reminded me to say this. It doesn't matter how much money you have, whether it's a small amount or a great amount. Everybody needs a budget. I'll say that again, regardless of how much money you have coming in or coming out. Everybody needs a budget, because without a budget, you're going to find yourself in a world of hurt, and destitute, and you're going to find yourself living above your means.
Mm.
So, to go back to your question, how does a zero-based budget differ from a traditional budget? I'm going to try to answer this the best way that I can. In a traditional budget, the goal and the intention is not necessarily to subtract all the way down to zero and allocate a place for each dollar that's coming to you. You know what? I actually need to glean from you. Are you familiar with doing a budget?
Yeah, just honestly, like when I do a budget, I do it similar to how you said. Like I have all of my income added up, and then I start with that. I have that bolded, and then I'll list literally all my bills from things that I absolutely have to pay, like rent, car, insurance, all that stuff, all the way down to like my nails, my hair, like things that I don't necessarily need, but I like to keep up with. So and I'll just have it all out, but I don't do it all the way to zero. So if I have a little or whatever money I have left over, I usually just automatically put that away in a savings, or I just leave it there.
I see. I see. So you actually helped me in your response. You actually helped me recall what most people do with regards to a quote unquote traditional budget as opposed to a zero-based budget. So here's how I'll answer your initial question. Um, with a zero-based budget, it forces the individual to be, what I started out saying, more intentional
Mm-hmm.
with every single dollar that's coming to them. So, like you just said, um, you will find yourself in certain times having more money left over, and you'll just do X, Y, Z with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a zero-based budget, prior to even ironing out the details of the numbers in a zero-based budget, what you want to do and what's very key and important is you would already want to have financial goals that you want to accomplish.
Right. Okay.
So the importance of that, of having financial goals already in the back of your mind that you want to accomplish. Let me give you an example of some financial goals. Say you have no emergency funds. That's very important. That's a very important foundational element of personal finance that we should all aspire to achieve. Setting up an emergency fund, whether it's a month or 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. So say your goal is to start out to save 1 month of living expenses. When you have a zero-based budget, as opposed to a traditional budget, that goal is in the back of your mind. So by the time you get down to the last item in your zero-based budget, you know what? Not even at the bottom. You can even put this at the top. Your goal, or for example, one of the line items in your budget would be to save for emergency fund. And so, what you would do is you could, for example, allocate $250 a month for you to save every time you get income, or not every time you get income, but for the month, you can allocate $250 for that goal of reaching or fulfilling your emergency fund. So, as opposed to a traditional budget, when someone is sitting down and having that kind of mind frame, they don't have goals in mind.
Mm-hmm.
They're just going on a whim and hoping everything works out, as opposed to, again, the point I'm trying to make is a zero-based budget helps you focus on the goals you're trying to reach, and it helps you be more intentional with your money.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think with what you're saying too, one thing that came into my mind is discipline. And I think that when you have intentions and you start out knowing what your goals are and things like that, it makes discipline not so much of a struggle to actually have to deal with. I think that it makes that routine and that structure a lot easier to kind of jump into.
Mm-hmm. You said something that's very important that needs to be understood by a lot of people when it comes to especially money. I'll speak for myself. don't rely on discipline when it comes to finances. I don't even rely on my own memory when it comes to having bills paid and things of that nature. The thing that I rely on to remove discipline out of the equation is I set up systems. And it's when you set up systems of giving your money places to go, or assignments rather. Let me say that again. When you set up systems that give your money assignments, you don't have to rely on your discipline. You don't have to rely on your memory, because your system is going to automatically take care of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we rely on our own discipline, that's more often when we find ourselves failing to reach our goals.
That makes perfect sense. So the next two questions kind of might sound the same. I don't know if I don't know, but I'll just ask them both. So at what age, or I know that you had started out saying, that you've pretty much had this embedded, into your lifestyle from a young age, from your dad and watching him and stuff like that. But if somebody doesn't have somebody that close to them that they can rely on to teach them something like that, or that they could at least, have a second hand point of view from, what age or at what point in life would you recommend that somebody start doing this?
Yeah, that's I love that question. There's a lot into that question. Let me focus on the latter part of that question. What age? I'm gonna answer that this way. When an individual comes into adulthood, um, regardless of their life backgrounds or life situations, we all have our different life situations and things that we know or that we've come to understand into our adulthood. But one thing that I think is common between all of us as we enter into adulthood is we all should have this sense of responsibility, or that moment in our life where we say, "Oh, I need to be an adult." So I think that when that actualization comes for each one of us, I think it becomes incumbent upon each of us to either begin to reach out into the world, so to say, to try to get the information that we need
Mm-hmm.
to, I guess, help ourselves become more fiscally responsible. And I'll also say this: the times that we live in now, especially with the advent of all the technologies that we have easily and readily available to us, there's almost no excuse as to why we should not have at least some of the information that we would need. So, in other words, none of us should be naive when it comes to essentially any topic. It all boils down to, again, does the individual want to take personal accountability for their finances and for their financial future and for the quality of life that they're living? That all, of course, stems from either the proper use or the misuse of the funds that they're working for. And I'll pause and say this real quick: we all work really hard for our money,
Mm-hmm.
and so, with that being said, why would you want to not have a system in place to where
Right.
you're not so easily giving it up?
Right. Oh,
Through consumerism.
yes, that makes so that's you said that perfectly. Like a light bulb literally just went off in my head.
Most definitely. Most definitely. And I guess to get back to your focused question, you said what age should we start?
Yeah.
Again, I think that I don't think it's necessarily an age. I think it's more so of the time and place in an individual's life where they have that actualization of adulthood, especially if they have a mouth to feed and a family to take care of. I think that actualization helps us to realize I don't know what I'm doing. And we all know when we are being irresponsible, especially as adults. Now, I'll also say this. You don't need to have an exuberant amount of money, and you don't need to have some high-paying job to be well off. And that's a misnomer that I think a lot of people have. You can just essentially do the basics and do your best, not do your best, but avoid consumer debt like the plague, and you will be better off than, I would say, more than 90% of the population. Just by simply maintaining the budget, staying out of debt, and continuing to save, just save money, and that'll put you far above and beyond just the average person that's walking around.
Right.
When it comes compared to their financial situation. I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. No, it definitely does. And actually, you were touching on another question that I have, but I wanted to ask you something really quick first. So let's say that ideal person that you're speaking of, they're just entering into adulthood, or their portion that they're entering of adulthood has become more financially strenuous, and they're starting to realize, okay, I need to be more responsible. I need to figure out, where my money's going and things like that. So what steps would you say to that person if they're looking to just get started? Like, what would they need, and what steps or methods would you recommend that they take to first start out?
Awesome question. Let me backtrack and apologize, so to say. I need to be more empathetic towards the individual that you just described, because it's so easy to assume that some of the basic things, like just simply doing your budget, are known, especially today. But these type of things aren't discussions that's held in the general education system.
Yeah, that was one of my questions for you too. I was going to bring that up.
Yes, so as basic as these things are, whether it's just a general budget or even balancing a checkbook, or even, knowing how to use a credit card, and that's a whole other subject in itself, but just the basics, those things aren't easily known. So going back to the individual that you described, what should they do starting out when it comes to understanding and taking a hold or grasp of the finances? The first thing that I would say is that it's very important to understand and know that you have to literally take responsibility and take action for your financial future. I'll say that again. You have to take accountability for your financial future in real time. And so here's what I mean by that. When you get to a place later on in your adulthood, some adults may find themselves just haphazardly putting their money certain places or in certain investments, what they think are investments, and people just find themselves haphazardly living with consumer debt like it's normal, and all the while these consumer debts are not only keeping them from increasing their net worth. That's one example. And then also, too, you have people that are haphazardly just putting their money into, let's say, for example, their 401k, or their retirement plan for their work, and they're not actively managing these things. They're not actively taking a role in what their money's doing. So by the time, no, not by the time, but the time is going to come where they're going to be older. They're going to be having a desire to use that money, and they're going to realize that either they don't have enough, or they're going to find themselves in a situation to where they're going to have to continue to work in order to be able to satisfy the lifestyle that they hoped they wanted to be able to live.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense.
And so, going back to that young person that's just starting out, it's very important to know and understand that you have to actually take action and not be passive when it comes to your finances. That's more so of a mindset, but without that mindset, you're more than likely going to fail.
Right.
And also, too, with mindset, it's important to know and understand that money is simply a tool. A lot of people find themselves, I think, worshiping or idolizing money. But again, money is simply a tool, and it's only effective as the person that is using it.
Right. Ooh, wow. That was deep.
And so money can also be a tool of destruction if it's misused. So it goes both ways. And so to go back to the question, the person just starting out, to give you some real world things that you can do in real time. The first thing I would say is to know what your financial snapshot, so to say, is. Stop. You don't want to have a fear of knowing what the reality of your financial situation is. So in other words, what you want to do is you'll want to, for example, get a copy of your credit report and see and find out who are all the people, financial institutions that you owe money to. Because once you do that, once you face the reality of where you are, that's going to help you move and navigate forward with more responsibility, or at least it should. And that's very important. Because what a lot of people do is they'll accumulate all of these bills from all this consumer debt and have all these things that have gone into collections, and they'll avoid it like a plague. And all the while, these detrimental things are hurting them, hurting their credit score, hurting their credit profile. And not only that, but the interest is accruing, and the bill is just getting bigger and bigger, like a snowball.
Right.
And so the sooner that you face these things like an adult, and take accountability and take responsibility for them, you'll realize that, and in some cases you'll realize, I can actually take care of these things. I can actually handle these things and move on with my life. So I would say that that's the next thing, getting a clear snapshot of knowing where you are fiscally responsible. And then I would also say, too, is knowing what we're talking about today, knowing and understanding how to use a zero-based budget. And no, let me backtrack a little bit. I would say that if an individual, especially a young person, does not have any consumer debt, I would say avoid consumer debt at all costs.
Right.
And consumer debt is going to Macy's and opening a Macy's card just to get out of trends of fashion or wow, I just heard myself say that, and I sound like an old person. It is what it is. Going to your latest store in the mall and opening a card for the sake of getting a sale, and then using that card and racking it up to the limit. um, buying cars that you can't afford, um, just basically putting yourself in a situation to where you're living above your means.
Mm-hmm.
The best and most impactful thing that a young person can do, especially starting out, is situating themselves in their life to where they are living well above the means of their income. And that's not just for young people, that's for anybody.
Right.
Any and every. You want to avoid living on the edge of how much money you have coming in as to how much money you have going out.
Mm-hmm.
You want to avoid that. I hope that answers your question. And if
No,
it doesn't,
it did.
Please let me know.
No, that was a great answer. So that leads me into another question. You touched on it a lot in your last response, but if you can kind of go a little bit deeper with how zero-based budgeting can help either improve your credit or help uh, get somebody out of debt.
Okay, I love it. I'll do my best. That's a kind of that's a deep question right there to get it. So how can it improve credit and help a person get out of debt?
Yeah.
Let me start by saying this. So one thing, or one of the steps that an individual will do that we mentioned earlier is that not only would an individual write down all of their bills, whether it's cell phone, daycare, groceries, rents, all of your bills, you're going to write them down on a sheet of paper or input them in an Excel spreadsheet or any kind of budgeting tools. And that's the thing, there's all kinds of tools out there. The thing with that is you just want to use what is comfortable for you. So, but at the very minimum and at the very basic level, an individual could just simply take out a sheet of paper and a calculator and just start out by writing down each of their bills that they're responsible for each month. Now, those are ongoing or recurring bills that we all have. The next thing, of course, that you mentioned is, of course, there's going to be those things that we have debts for. So I would say most commonly, the type of debt that would fluctuate the most is going to be those credit card debts. And the reason why I say that is because I think of a car payment, more often than not, our car payments, or most people's car payments, are generally fixed, a fixed amount.
Mm-hmm.
So we can kind of rely on that fixed amount to be the same each month in a zero-based budget. So to answer your question, how a zero-based budget can help an individual get out of debt is this. So say, for example, a person has a credit card, and on that credit card, they owe $3,000. And more than likely, at that amount, that minimum payment for that credit card each month is going to be, for example, I'm just making this number up, $50. So the balance on the credit card that the individual owes the financial institution is $3,000. But they're saying at the minimum, you can just pay us $50. Now, they want you to pay that minimum.
Right, right.
Because the longer that you pay that minimum, the more interest that you're accruing on that balance that's owed to them. And that's just ultimately going to be more money in their coffers. And so that's what you want to avoid. I highly doubt, and here's the thing, I'm glad that this led me to thinking this also. Most people fail to realize or think of it like this. We go to work every day, and for most of us, we get paid hourly. And so when you think of how much money you get paid per hour, say, for example, the average person, let's just say, makes $20 an hour. And when you think of how much you would have to pay in interest over a long period of time, or let's just say in one statement period. Um, let's just say, for example, and I'm just throwing this in the scenario just for sake of discussion, is that part of that payment is just, for example, $25 in interest. You are literally taking more than an hour of your life, an hour of your workforce, not your workforce, but your life force, and you're giving it to a financial institution for free when you pay them interest. That's exactly what you're doing.
Right.
And so I just wanted to throw that into the discussion to help people to kind of keep that in mind. As you're racking up these consumer debts and you find yourself paying these exuberant amounts of interest over long periods of time, you're essentially you are willfully making yourself their slave, because you're going to your job, earning money at an hourly rate, and then you're turning around and freely giving it to them just for the sake of some consumer goods that they let you use credit for that you probably don't even use currently, or you probably haven't even used in the past several months. And so that's a very important thing to realize. But to get back to your original question, how does it help the person with, how does a zero-based budget help an individual help their credit situation? So back to that minimum payment. We said that the minimum payment was $50, for example, for a given statement for a month.
Mm-hmm.
So when a person realizes that, okay, I budgeted for all of my bills, and I have, for example, let's just stick with the $500 again. I have $500 left. What they could do is they could take that $500 left and they could allocate it towards that credit card balance. And so instead of maintaining that credit card balance for however many months, by paying the minimum, let's just say, for example, it would take that individual, I'm just making this up because I don't know the math off the top of my head, 3 years to pay that $3,000 off just by paying the minimum payment.
Right.
So I'm going to take $3,000 and I'm going to divide that by 500, and that looks like they're going to pay it off in 6 months.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense.
So by paying it off in that 6 months, as opposed to just paying the minimum payment every month, they're avoiding that interest that they would have been giving to that financial institution, which is essentially you're just taking money, throwing it in a trash can, throwing gasoline on it, and lighting it on fire.
Right.
That's what you're doing. So that's essentially how a zero-based budget can help a person pay off their credit card debts. You can not only do that for, of course, you can do that for any debt. Any debt that you owe, you can allocate or give purpose to all of your money, and that's the intentionality and the power of a zero-based budget.
Right. I love that answer. That was a great answer. So this next question is kind of two-parted, so I'm going to try to break it up as best as I can and try to choose my words as best as I can. So this question that I have is, so would you consider zero-based budgeting a short-term or long-term process? And I'll just leave it like that. Would you consider it a short-term or a long-term process? Or both?